I never thought a simple favor from my best friend would turn into the most confusing day of my life. Picking up his online crush from the airport should have been routine. But the moment she turned around and smiled, everything changed. Her gaze lingered a little too long, and my heart raced in a way I couldn't ignore. Was this the start of something I shouldn't feel? Ryan and I had been best friends since high school. Inseparable, really. He was the guy everyone liked. Easygoing, funny, and the type who always had your back. When he told me about Emma, the girl he'd been talking to online for months, I was genuinely happy for him. Ryan hadn't had much luck in love, so hearing him sound so optimistic about someone felt like a win for both of us. I wasn't exactly the romantic type myself. My life was simple: work, the occasional hike, and lazy evenings spent reading or catching up on shows. While Ryan was the extrovert, I was the quieter one, often content to be the observer. But that's why we worked so well together. He brought the adventure, and I kept us grounded. Emma was supposed to fly into town for the weekend to finally meet Ryan in person. He couldn't stop talking about her. "She's amazing, Alex. Smart, funny, and kind," he'd say, his excitement infectious. When work called him away at the last minute, he'd asked me for a favor that, at the time, felt small: pick her up from the airport and bring her to his place. No big deal, right? When I agreed, I didn't think much of it. After all, this was Ryan's story, his chance at finding someone special. I wasn't there to make it about me. He'd shown me her photos once or twice. A bright smile, curly brown hair, and warm eyes that seemed to sparkle even through a screen. She looked nice, but I didn't feel any particular way about it. She wasn't my type anyway. That's what I told myself, at least. But from the moment I saw her standing outside the terminal, her suitcase by her side, everything changed. She wasn't just attractive, she was radiant, exuding a quiet confidence that made it impossible to look away. I could see why Ryan was so taken with her. What I didn't expect was how I would feel, like some invisible thread had been tied between us in that instant. My heart raced, and I struggled to keep my composure. I knew she wasn't here for me, but I couldn't ignore the sudden pull I felt toward her. And that scared me. At first, I told myself it was nothing. The feeling I had when I met Emma was just a fluke, a fleeting reaction to meeting someone new. She was beautiful, sure, but that didn't mean anything. Ryan was my best friend, and she was here for him. I needed to focus on that. But the more time I spent with Emma, the harder it became to ignore the subtle pull between us. The car ride from the airport should have been routine, just polite small talk to pass the time. Instead, it felt effortless, natural, as if we'd known each other for years. We discovered shared interests in hiking, indie music, and even cooking, things I rarely found in common with anyone, let alone someone I'd just met. The way she laughed at my dry humor or leaned in when I spoke made me feel like she was genuinely interested, and that was unexpected. Still, I pushed the thoughts away. She wasn't flirting, she was just being friendly, I told myself. She was probably nervous about meeting Ryan for the first time and was looking for reassurance. It didn't mean anything. But then there were the glances, the way her smile lingered a little too long, the way my chest tightened when she laughed at something I said. When we got to Ryan's place, I walked her to the door. It felt like the polite thing to do, but the moment she turned to thank me, something in her eyes caught me off guard. Her gratitude felt deeper, like it wasn't just about the ride. "Thanks for everything, Alex," she said, her voice soft and warm. For a second, I thought she might say more, but she didn't. After I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I tried to brush it off, to focus on work or anything else that could distract me. But Emma kept popping into my mind, her smile, her laugh, the way she looked at me. It wasn't just her beauty. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. And then the text started. A few days later, Emma messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, Alex. Just wanted to say thanks again for picking me up. I had a great time talking with you." My stomach twisted as I read her words. It was a simple message, polite even, but something about it felt significant. Was she just being kind? Or was there something more? I tried to keep my reply casual. "Of course, no problem. It was great talking to you too. Hope everything's going well with Ryan." A safe response, one that didn't betray the chaos in my head. Her reply came quickly. "Yeah, things are going well. But I was thinking, I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we connected, you know?" That word, connected, sent my mind spiraling. What was she trying to say? I knew I shouldn't overthink it, but I couldn't help myself. Each new text from her seemed to blur the lines between friendship and something else. The more we talked, the more I found myself looking forward to her messages, craving the sound of her voice. Guilt started to creep in, a constant weight in the back of my mind. Ryan was my best friend. He didn't deserve this, whatever this was. But at the same time, I couldn't deny what I was feeling. And the worst part, I was starting to think Emma felt it too. She didn't mention Ryan much in our conversations, and when she did, it was brief, almost dismissive. It was like he was fading into the background of whatever was building between us. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the signs. The way she texted me late at night, the way her words seemed to linger in my mind long after our conversations ended. I didn't know what to do. The more I tried to pull away, the more I found myself drawn to her. Something was happening, something I couldn't control. And it was only a matter of time before it all came to a head. It started innocently enough, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Late-night texts turned into long conversations that felt more intimate than they had any right to be. Emma wasn't just kind or engaging. She was magnetic, the kind of person who made you feel seen in a way that was almost addictive. And the more we talked, the more I realized I was in trouble. It wasn't just the things we said, it was the way we said them. The way her messages carried a warmth that felt reserved just for me. The way her voice softened when we spoke on the phone. I knew it was wrong to feel this way, but every time we talked, the guilt I felt was drowned out by something stronger. Something I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. One night, after hours of texting, she sent me a message that sent my heart racing. I don't know why, but I feel like I can be myself with you in a way I can't with anyone else. Does that make sense? I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I knew I should say something safe, something that didn't blur the lines even further. But instead, I replied with the truth. It does. I feel the same way. From that moment, everything changed. We didn't talk about Ryan much anymore, not directly at least. But the weight of his absence in our conversations hung over every word we exchanged. She didn't seem to want to talk about him, and I didn't dare bring him up. Instead, we focused on each other, on the strange, undeniable connection that seemed to grow stronger every day. The first time we met up without Ryan, it was under the guise of something harmless, coffee at a small cafe downtown. I told myself it was just two friends catching up, but the way my heart raced as I walked in told a different story. When I saw her sitting at a corner table, her face lighting up as she spotted me, I knew this wasn't just a casual hangout. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly as it always did. But this time there was an undercurrent, a tension neither of us acknowledged. When she laughed, her eyes lingered on mine just a little too long. When she reached for her coffee, her hand brushed mine, and neither of us pulled away. It was as if every moment was charged, every glance and touch carrying a weight we were both afraid to name. As the afternoon turned into evening, I realized I didn't want it to end. She suggested a walk through the park nearby, and I agreed without hesitation. The air was cool and crisp, and the fading light cast everything in a golden glow. We walked side by side, our conversation quieter now, more reflective. At one point, she stopped to admire a cluster of flowers by the path, and I couldn't help but watch her, struck by how natural she looked, how comfortable she seemed in that moment. When she turned back to me, there was something in her expression that made my breath catch. "Thanks for today," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I really needed this." "Me too," I admitted, my throat tight. I wanted to say more, to tell her how much I had come to care for her, how impossible it was to stop thinking about her. But I couldn't. She wasn't mine to feel this way about, no matter how much it felt like she should be. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. And then, without thinking, I reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a second I thought I'd crossed a line. But instead of pulling away, she leaned into the touch, her gaze meeting mine with an intensity that made my chest ache. "I don't know what this is," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't stop thinking about you." I swallowed hard, every part of me screaming to say something, anything that would make this easier. But there were no easy words, no simple answers. "I can't stop thinking about you either," I admitted finally, my voice raw with emotion. For a moment, we just stood there, the world around us fading into the background. I wanted to kiss her, to close the distance between us, and give in to everything I was feeling. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I stepped back, my hands clenched at my sides. "We can't do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not like this." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know," she said. "But that doesn't make it any easier." As we walked back to her apartment, The silence between us was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was as if we both understood that something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. When we reached her door, she turned to me, her expression conflicted but tender. "Thank you, Alex," she said, her voice soft. "For everything." I forced a smile, my chest tight. "Anytime." And as she disappeared inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The tension between us had become impossible to ignore. Every text, every meeting, every lingering glance felt like a thread pulling us closer together, tightening the knot of emotions I could no longer untangle. I knew it was wrong to feel this way about Emma. She was with Ryan, my best friend, the person I had shared so much of my life with. But the connection between us wasn't something I could deny anymore, and neither could she. It all came to a head one evening when Emma texted me, asking if I wanted to meet her for dinner. "Just us," she added, and those 2 words sent my heart racing. I knew what it meant, what we were both walking into, but I agreed anyway. Part of me wanted to say no, to stop this before it spiraled out of control. But the other part, the part that had been drawn to her from the moment I saw her, wouldn't let me. The restaurant was quiet, tucked away on a side street, the kind of place that felt private, almost intimate. When I arrived, Emma was already there, seated at a small table in the corner. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes lighting up with a warmth that made my chest ache. She was beautiful as always, but there was something different about her tonight. A vulnerability in her expression, a quiet resolve that told me this wasn't just another casual meeting. "Hi," she said softly as I sat down across from her. "Hi," I replied, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The conversation started off light, small talk about work, the weather, anything to avoid the elephant in the room. But it didn't take long for the walls to come down. Emma leaned forward, her gaze fixed on mine, and for a moment, it felt like the rest of the world had faded away. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "About everything that's happened." I nodded, my throat tightening. "Me too." Her eyes searched mine, as if looking for some kind of reassurance. "Alex, I don't know how to say this, but I can't ignore what I'm feeling anymore. I've tried, but it's there. Every time we talk, every time I see you, it's like this pull I can't resist." My heart raced at her words, a mix of relief and guilt flooding through me. "Emma, I feel it too," I admitted. "But what about Ryan? He's my best friend. I don't want to hurt him." Her expression softened, but her eyes filled with tears. "I know. I've been trying to figure out what to do, how to make sense of all this. Ryan is safe. He's kind and supportive, but I don't feel the same way about him that I feel about you." Hearing those words felt like both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, I couldn't deny the joy it brought me to know she felt the same way I did. But on the other, I couldn't shake the weight of what it meant, for her, for Ryan, for all of us. "Emma, I started, but she cut me off." "I know what you're going to say," she said quickly. "And you're right. This is messy and complicated, and it's not fair to anyone. But I can't keep pretending that I don't feel this way. I don't want to hurt Ryan, but I also can't keep lying to myself." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with the truth neither of us could ignore. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence speaking louder than any words ever could. I wanted to reach out to her, to take her hand and tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't. "Not yet. Emma, I care about you more than I can even explain," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. "But this isn't just about us. It's about Ryan too. We have to figure out how to do this the right way, whatever that looks like." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know, and I will. I needed you to know how I feel." In that moment, I saw the full weight of her emotions, the conflict, the guilt, the hope. And I realized that this wasn't just about what I wanted, or what she wanted. It was about navigating a situation that had no easy answers, no clear path forward. When we left the restaurant, the air between us was charged with unspoken words. As we stood outside, the cool night air brushing against our skin, Emma turned to me, her expression earnest. "Alex," she said softly, "I don't know what's going to happen next. But I know I want to figure it out with you." I nodded, my chest tightening. "Me too." And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out and pulled her into a hug. She melted into my arms, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It didn't matter how complicated things were, or how much we still had to figure out. In that moment, it was just us. But as I walked away that night, the reality of the situation came crashing down around me. Ryan deserved to know the truth. He deserved to hear it from me, not from anyone else. And as much as it terrified me, I knew I couldn't keep this from him any longer. The next day, I called Ryan and asked to meet him. My stomach churned as I waited for him at our usual spot, a small coffee shop we'd been going to for years. When he walked in, his face lit up with a smile that made my chest ache. "Hey man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I tried to find the right words. "Ryan, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." His smile faltered, his brow furrowing in concern. "What is it?" And so I told him everything. About Emma, about how we'd connected, about the feelings I couldn't ignore. I didn't sugarcoat it, and I didn't make excuses. I just laid it all out, hoping he could see how much it was tearing me apart. When I finished, the silence between us was deafening. Ryan stared at me, his expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. "Alex," he said finally, his voice shaking. "How could you do this? You're my best friend." "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "And I hate myself for it. But I couldn't keep lying to you. You deserve to know the truth." Ryan shook his head, his hands clenched into fists. "I trusted you. I trusted both of you. I didn't have anything else to say. All I could do was sit there as the friendship I'd valued more than anything crumbled before my eyes." Ryan's reaction was worse than I'd imagined. His anger was sharp, and his words cut deeper than I thought possible. "You were supposed to have my back, Alex," he said, his voice rising. "How could you do this to me? To us?" I couldn't look him in the eye. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Ryan. I swear. It had happened. It just happened. That's the best you've got," he spat, his voice filled with disbelief. "You knew how much she meant to me. And Emma. What? She just decided I wasn't enough after all those months of talking. I wanted to defend her, to explain that it wasn't as simple as he was making it out to be. But I didn't. He needed to feel what he was feeling, and anything I said in that moment would only make it worse. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you, Ryan." He shook his head, his expression a mix of fury and heartbreak. "Well, you did. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed our friendship." Those words hung in the air like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Ryan stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting there, my hands trembling and my stomach in knots. I'd known this moment was inevitable, but knowing didn't make it any easier. I had lost my best friend, and it was entirely my fault. The days that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. Ryan didn't return my calls or messages, and I couldn't blame him. I had betrayed his trust in the worst way possible. As much as I wanted to fix things, I knew I had to give him space, though the silence between us felt unbearable. Emma wasn't much better off. She called me the day after I spoke to Ryan, her voice trembling as she asked how it had gone. When I told her the truth, the guilt in her voice was palpable. "I never wanted this to happen, Alex," she said softly. "I didn't want to come between you and Ryan." "I know," I said. "Neither did I." For a while, it felt like we were both drowning in the aftermath of what we'd done. Our conversations became strained, filled with the weight of everything that had happened. We didn't meet up or talk late into the night like we used to. Instead, there was a distance between us, one that neither of us seemed to know how to close. Ryan, meanwhile, wasn't just avoiding me. He was avoiding Emma too. She told me that he hadn't spoken to her since I'd told him the truth. "He won't even answer my texts," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix this." Hearing the pain in her voice was like a knife to my chest. I hated seeing her like this, but I didn't know how to make it better. The guilt we both carried felt like a wall between us, one that neither of us could climb over. For a while, I wondered if this was the end, not just of my friendship with Ryan, but of whatever it was between Emma and me. Maybe we weren't meant to be together after all. Maybe the damage we'd caused was too great to repair. But then, one evening, Emma called me out of the blue. "Can we talk?" she asked. "In person." We met at the same cafe where this whole mess had started. She looked exhausted, her usual spark dimmed by everything we'd been through. But when she saw me, she managed a small smile. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her eyes. "About everything, about you, Ryan, and what's happened between us." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "I don't regret how I feel about you, Alex," she continued. "But I can't keep pretending that this is something we can just move forward from without dealing with the consequences. I hurt Ryan. We both did. And I can't ignore that." "Neither can I," said quietly. "But where does that leave us?" She looked down at her hands, her expression thoughtful. "I think we need time. Time to figure out who we are outside of all of this. Time to heal from what we've done. I care about you, Alex. More than I can put into words. But I don't want us to start something on the foundation of someone else's pain. Her words hit me like a wave, not because they weren't true, but because I knew they were exactly what I needed to hear. As much as I wanted to be with her, I knew she was right. We couldn't build something new without first making peace with the past. I understand, I said finally, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here. She smiled then, a soft, bittersweet smile that carried both hope and sadness. Thank you, Alex. For everything. As she left, I felt a strange mix of emotions, loss, hope, guilt, and relief all swirling together. I didn't know what the future held for me, for Emma, or for my fractured friendship with Ryan. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. The fallout from our choices wasn't something we could escape. The pain we'd caused wouldn't disappear overnight. But I knew that, in time, we might find a way to move forward, separately or maybe even together. The weeks following Emma's decision were quiet, almost eerily so. Ryan hadn't spoken to me since that day at the coffee shop, and I hadn't reached out again. I knew he needed time, but the silence weighed heavily on me. Losing a friend like him wasn't something I could easily accept. It felt like a piece of my life had been torn away, leaving behind a void I didn't know how to fill. Emma and I had agreed to take some space, and I respected that. She needed to process everything, and so did I. For the first time in what felt like months, I had the chance to sit with my thoughts, to confront the choices I had made and what they meant for my relationships, my values, and my future. I realized how much of my life I had spent on autopilot, letting things happen without truly considering the consequences. Meeting Emma had been a wake-up call, not just about love, but about what I wanted from life and who I wanted to be. She made me question myself in ways I hadn't before, and even though it had come at a cost, I couldn't regret what she had brought into my life. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling aimlessly through old photos on my phone, a picture of Ryan and me caught my eye. It was from a camping trip a couple of years ago, both of us grinning as we stood knee-deep in a river, holding up fish we'd caught. I felt a lump in my throat as I stared at the image. That was the Ryan I knew, the friend who had been there through thick and thin, who had always had my back. I had betrayed him, and whether or not he ever forgave me, I owed it to him to try to make things right. The next day, I sent him a message. It wasn't long or elaborate, just an acknowledgement of what had happened, and an apology from the heart. Ryan, I know I hurt you in a way that's hard to forgive, and I don't expect anything from you. But I want you to know how sorry I am. You've been my best friend, and losing you has been one of the hardest things I've ever faced. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I didn't hear back right away, and I didn't expect to. But sending that message felt like a step forward, like I was finally taking responsibility for the damage I had caused. Emma, too, began reaching out, though cautiously. She wanted to be honest with Ryan about her feelings and what had happened between us. I admired her courage. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but she didn't want to hide anymore. We talked about it one evening, sitting on a park bench as the sun set. I want him to hear it from me, she said, her voice steady but soft. He deserves that much. I nodded. He does. But so do you, Emma. You deserve to be honest about what you're feeling. It wasn't long after that Ryan finally responded to my message. His words were simple but meaningful. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I appreciate the apology. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe there was hope for us to rebuild, even if it wouldn't be the same as before. As for Emma and me, we kept our distance but stayed in touch. Our connection hadn't faded, but we both knew that rushing into something would only make things harder. We needed time to heal, to grow, and to figure out what we really wanted. The experience taught me something I hadn't fully understood before. Love and relationships are messy, and mistakes are inevitable. But what matters most is how you face those mistakes, how you take responsibility and try to make things right. It's not about being perfect, it's about being honest, even when it's hard. I didn't know what the future held for me, Emma, or even Ryan. But I knew I wanted to approach whatever came next with a clearer sense of who I was, and what I stood for. And that, in itself, felt like a step in the right direction. What would you do if you were in Alex's position? Or Emma's? Do you think Ryan could ever forgive him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales about love, betrayal, and second chances. Stay tuned for our next story. It's one you definitely won't want to miss.